Welcome. Thank you again for joining us today for our first AMATYC webinar of 2023. If you'd like to support future AMATYC webinars, please consider becoming a member of AMATYC. And we would also like to thank McGraw-Hill Higher Education, a proud supporter of the AMATYC webinar series for 2023. If you would like to, please connect with AMATYC on social media. We have Facebook, of course, Twitter, and we also have our My AMATYC website. If you have not taken a look, feel free. We are all looking forward to our AMATYC conference in Omaha in November, and there are other very worthwhile professional development opportunities, as well as publications via AMATYC. Are you the next AMATYC webinar presenter? You have a great idea and are ready to share, submit your idea using the AMATYC webinar proposal form via the QR code, and as well as a QR code showing any of our previous AMATYC webinar recordings. And please note that it may take up to 2 weeks for this recording to post to our website. Additionally, the views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATYC. Commercial products mentioned by the presenter are not endorsed by AMATYC. And so today, again, we have implementing what works from conversations with students and faculty. Brian Cafarella, right? I hope I did well.
Yeah, very
is
good.
Our presenter. He's taught math at a community college for 20 years. Additionally, he's passionate about research in community college math with a focus on student and faculty experiences, as well as best practices. He's published several articles focusing on community college math in peer-reviewed journals, as well as 2 books. Note, at the end or near the end of our webinar today, I will actually place a link to the survey for this webinar. AMATYC webinars are a great opportunity for you to enjoy a little professional development from the comfort of your office or home. It's a chance for everyone to share, to discuss, and to learn. We appreciate your feedback and look forward to reviewing your responses. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me, webinarcoordinator@amatyc.org. And with that, I am going to go ahead and let Brian start his presentation.
Well, thank you, Mary. Get this up here. So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm on East Coast time, so it's just a little after 12 noon here. I'm Brian Cafarella. Thank you for joining me and everybody on this Friday. It's end of the semester time if you're on semesters, and I just find myself, I feel like I say this at the end of every school year, just kind of crashing and collapsing into the end of the semester. You just know what I'm talking about, that time of year. So thank you for taking this time to really join in this discussion of our great discipline of community college math, when I know there's a lot going on with getting ready for finals and getting students ready for the end of the semester. I appreciate the introduction, Mary. A little more about myself. I have taught, this is my 20th year actually at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. But over the past decade or so, and this is really something I never saw my career taking this direction, I've really taken an interest in research in our discipline of community college math. And more specifically, I've focused on qualitative research, kind of unusual for a left brain thinking math person, because I really am interested not just in the quantitative data in terms of success rates, best practices, comparison, what works, what doesn't, but really the how and the why. So what works well for our students? What works well for faculty? And let's hear about the how and the why. I really am interested in hearing like direct quotes from students, direct quotes from faculty, those who are really in the trenches, so to say, initiatives, modalities, what works, what can we improve, and what can we learn as we move towards the future. So a little bit about my background, and this presentation is just over the years of my discussions with community college math faculty, and more importantly, students who have taken and completed eventually college level math. I like to really focus on students who initially struggle with math anxiety, hate math. I never thought I could pass a math class, then eventually complete a introductory college level math class. What works? And I kind of a little take on, I don't want to say the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll say the good, the mixed, and the uncertain. Now, I kind of start with where where did community colleges come from? And that's a loaded question. And if you go back to the 1960s, two-year colleges, first of all, have existed since the early 1900s, but there was a major focus in the 1960s, the Higher Education Act, in serving the previously underserved. For example, minority students, students of non-traditional age, those who in the past never really got the opportunity to go to college. And that's where the push for basically open access and low tuition, hence our open admissions American community college system really grew. I mean, look at that statistic between 1965 and 1972. I know in this day and age, tenure track positions tend to be few and far between, but I tell faculty, it's like, yeah, you wanted to be a community college faculty member in the late 1960s, early 1970s. My goodness, you could have your pick. But what's really impressive is when I've spoken with community college faculty in especially the early 1970s, they really started with nothing. They started with the mindset, like many of us do, that they were going to teach community college students math how they were taught, and how they were taught was in a university setting. And they learned very quickly that the community college student was very different than the university student. So they really had to adapt, learn best practices for this very unknown entity that was the community college student. And it's really amazing when, and in fact, one gentleman even said, I started with a class with just several blackboard and several adding machines, not calculators, adding machines. Calculators hadn't really grown into fruition at that point in time. So it's just impressive when you think about what we've learned, the resources that we've accumulated in kind of 50 plus years. And it really is thanks to these folks in the 1970s who started with nothing and really kind of helped us along. So that's kind of what I wanted to start with is in talking with faculty over the decades, not just the present time, but over the decades, what has overwhelmingly worked very well for community college students, and my conversations with students, what has overwhelmingly worked well? Like if we were to talk with somebody who's just starting out teaching community college math, what could you do to just knock it out of the park? What are practices that if you implement them well, they just work for our students? And of course, what could we keep adding to? We obviously want to keep adding to these practices as well. And of course, the first student engagement, the term that clearly, the more that students can connect with peers, the more that they can connect with faculty members, the more likely they are to persist in college and be successful. I know you've heard that statistic before. These are just a snapshot of just some of the engagement techniques that have been successful. I think some of them are pretty self-explanatory. Not sure if anybody's or how many people are familiar with academic controversy. That's something I had not heard before. That's actually a term coined by Elizabeth Barkley. Barkley, I think I'm saying that right, who does write and research about student engagement. But I was kind of fascinated how that can work in community college math classes. Academic controversy is kind of splitting students into groups and giving them topics to debate about, so to say, and how that can work in a math class is, for example, quadratic equations. What if you put students into groups and one group of students could debate, well, the quadratic formula is the best method to solve a quadratic equation. No, if it's possible, factoring is the best possible method, because if you know how to factor, you can do in a minute what could possibly take 10 minutes. No, solve by using square root method if it's possible. So it's great. I find this also works very well myself and from speaking with faculty and students in the teacher preparatory courses, if you teach those classes, in those classes, the when the concept of addition, subtraction, multiplication, but different methods of addition, subtraction, multiplication are explored. Different groups about, hey, this works better, the traditional multiplication versus lattice multiplication. So you get some really great debates there. Small group tutorials where we have small groups, but possibly a lead student who might be a little more ahead, but can work with students who are maybe struggling a little bit more. It keeps the student who is ahead engaged. And also what faculty have said is that it's less threatening for the students who are struggling to kind of be maybe helped and tutored by a peer, as opposed to a faculty member. And of course, another big word, I know you've heard this, is contextualization. The word, if you've taught math, especially for a long time, the first sentence, the first question rather, is something you hear in your sleep, and rightfully so, rightfully so. Students, and both students and faculty have said, the more, or students, for example, the more I can relate this to my everyday life, the more I can see how mathematics relates to everyday life, the better I'm going to understand it. And some different, I'll get into some different ways of contextualization, but faculty have also said that a great way to start this is surveying the student interests at the beginning of the semester, possibly their major or just their overall interest. And that can kind of help guide where certain applications may go. Do you have a lot of nursing students in your class, allied health? Could you do more applications geared towards that? Do you have a lot of football fans? Quantitative reasoning course or a statistics course, you could use probability. So, but kind of gaining the interest. And speaking of which, that quantitative reasoning courses that's really exploded, so to say, over the past decade or so for non-math majors, has really become popular because of the real life applications. Debt to income ratio. Students love the debt to income ratio problems. How much should I earn so that the landlord is going to rent me an apartment? And of course, probability and some statistical studies. Something I find really exciting is that math in the industry and math using robotics. And a lot of these are due to grants from National Science Foundation. This is becoming very popular in the 2020s. Why this is exciting is because when you look at the history of our discipline, there have been many initiatives and many modalities, but the higher level courses, at least on a national level, calculus, especially pre-calculus, have stayed pretty stagnant in terms of how we teach them. I often say, if you were to go back in time to a calculus class in 1975 and then forward to a calculus class in, let's say, 2012, maybe, you wouldn't see a whole lot of difference. Not that that's bad. It's just there wasn't a whole lot of change. But now we're seeing a lot more applications in these higher level courses relating math to the industry. So I find that very exciting. I wanted to just plug a webinar I attended at the Indiana Matic conference a couple weeks ago. A fellow named Jay Martin from Wake Technical Community College in North Carolina. They're doing what seems like a lot of great work relating his pre-calc course to the industry. I think he said he's going to be at Omaha. I don't know if he's presenting or whatnot, but I just wanted to plug that. That was a great conference. And at Sinclair Community College, I want to just plug some of our awesome faculty who are doing some great work relating robotics, for example, using functions to allow a robot to move based on that function, which is really cool. But again, students are able to see how we're relating math to industry. And I also wanted to just kind of now take a step back because we talked about relating math to industry. But these are a couple of examples that students have relayed to me in terms of how contextualization helped them in lower level math courses. And the first focuses on multiplication of negatives. Why in God's name is a negative times a negative a positive? And I thought this again, this was a student who relayed to me, she never understood why was a negative a positive. It's like always something that I heard. I never understood it. I just thought it was stupid. I thought it was something that somebody came up with who didn't have a date one Friday night. Oh, negative times a negative is a positive. But I thought this was a great example of how a negative times a negative could actually equal a positive, because I think some students have had experience with this, whether it be a gym membership or sometimes a online subscription. I know that happens to me all the time. My wife religiously gets us tied into these recurring online subscriptions that I always have to fix. And this is the kind of situation I deal with on a daily basis where we have to get reimbursed. And the second one, division by zero. One student said to me, he remembered back in no, it was a she, back in junior high or middle school, the teacher saying, a number or 8 divided by 0 is undefined. Mathematicians do not know what that means. And she was thinking, well, does that mean mathematicians are stupid? How do you not know what a number divided by 0 is? But again, once she got this cupcake explanation of what it truly means to divide by 0, and why it's truly not possible to divide by 0, because yeah, if I have 0 students in a room, it's impossible to divide up the cupcakes, right? Now, granted, if I have 0 cupcakes with 50 students, oh yeah, every student is getting 0 cupcakes. But how is it possible if there's no students in the room for anybody to get any number of cupcakes? And that was kind of her aha moment. So to me, these were very enlightening. And by the way, I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with you later. We can just talk about how. Hope nobody's trying to feverishly write everything down, but happy to share this with you later via any method. But I really, like I said, these were just 2 great examples. And Mary was talking about the technology before. My theory, because it seems like sometimes when something new in technology comes out, we tend to think, okay, this is the answer. We know students struggle. We know that our success rates in community college math they've struggled over the years. We've wanted to improve them. Sometimes there's a tendency to think, okay, this new technological advancement is just going to help us get those success rates up. I truly don't think any specific technological advancement is going to do that. I mean, look at what we've acquired over the years, thanks to, obviously the technology field and what we've been able to implement. But no specific technological advancement is going to help success rates skyrocket. But what is on us is the ability to adapt. We have to be able, for us to be successful and for us to successfully help our students and continue to move forward, we have to be able to successfully adapt to technology. A lot of that is also professional development, but also interdepartment mentoring. I mean, we have one fellow in our department. I can now say young guy because I'm not young anymore. But is just awesome with the new technology and has really helped me and several others with a lot of the technological advancements. So I think that's important, to have that interdepartment mentoring as well. Also, something I found talking with faculty, obviously, when the pandemic hit, that was a shock, and I mean, we weren't prepared. But what some faculty mentioned was they were surprised how, although Zoom and other of similar technologies had been around, many faculty weren't familiar with those. So it was a shock, in that we had to convert our courses to virtual, but it was an extra learning curve, possibly more than it should have been, because so many faculty were not familiar with Zoom or other similar technologies. So I mean, obviously that's probably never going to happen again. I hope not, but that's why it really helps to kind of stay on the technology. And I truly think when you look at these, that in the 2020s, I think when you look at each decade, almost like, for example, the 90s was about online learning. The 2000, well, the aughts, the 2000s was more about interactive math technology like My Math Lab and Alex. And I think the 2020s are going to be about artificial intelligence. I really do. I think you look back at 2030, it's going to be about artificial intelligence and robotics. And when I've spoken with students, what it seems like they appreciate the most. I mean, what do students just so appreciate? It's that matter of fact instruction, that thorough matter of fact instruction from their instructors that goes from beginning to beginning middle to middle end to end. Um, that is just what they appreciate. They just appreciate the whole story. So when a student has a question on a particular topic, it's getting the whole story. This is probably a bad example and not representative of most math teachers, but one fellow was remembering back when he was in middle school. He said he was always afraid to ask a question. He sheepishly raised his hand one time when the teacher was discussing uh, graphing by table or graphing by intercept method. Y equals 4x plus 12, and we graph by making x 0, y 0, or just simply assigning x a value, solving for y. Again, intercept method or graphing by table. And he raised his hand and he said, well, how did you get, so like y equals 4x plus 2? The teacher plugged in 2, solve for y. How did you get 2 for x? The teacher's response was, I made it up. Okay. I mean, that's a bad example in terms of the what's representative, I think, of most math teachers, but again, that turned him off of math. So what students have really said, and he said, when he eventually went to community college and he got this great caring teacher who just gave him the whole story. I thought this second quote was great. I've stolen this many times. It was a student who actually relayed this to me, and I've stolen it because I don't like ambiguity myself. Ambiguity is not a 4-letter word, but ambiguity should be a 4-letter word. I was like, that is just awesome. I mean, I've got to buy the rights to that because that was great. And that was just in terms of how the student felt about a math class. It's like no ambiguity. I need the whole story. I need a thorough, matter-of-fact explanation. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but that's interesting coming from students. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that, Drew. I just saw your question because this is, yeah, that's coming up a little bit later. I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's under the mixed results, by the way. That's why I wanted to bring this up now, and I want to bring that up again. If people saw Drew's question in the Q&A about more of the promoting of thinking, so I want to bring that up. Whoops, sorry, hit the wrong button here. Okay, so. And I think to me, what the most successful, this is my opinion, but also talking with students and faculty, um, the biggest success story, I think, of all the initiatives we've developed, tried, whatever, alternative math pathways have been the best. And you know that at one time, typically a student would, as probably as during the 70s, 80s, 90s, into the 2000s, students would test into a developmental math class, possibly have to go through 5 or 6 developmental math classes en route to college algebra. We have really done a great job in shortening pathways and implementing these quantitative reasoning or introductory, well, we've had introductory statistics, but with a co-requisite where a student may only need a short amount of standalone developmental math, maybe a semester or even an 8-week session of developmental math, maybe even a 1-week booster course of developmental math. And it allows them to go into quantitative reasoning or introductory statistics with the co-requisite course. There's some conceptual data that you can see below that this is really working well for students. Students appreciate the short pathways of not having to take several developmental math classes. Also, with what we've kind of changed as well is it used to be college algebra was kind of the be all and end all course that students had to successfully pass. That really came from the mindset in the 1950s and 1960s. Before that, math was kind of whatever in terms of American higher education. But after World War II and during Sputnik, math became very appreciated and valued in our country. And not just math, but calculus. We want students to do well in calculus, all right, because that's the kind of math you need for the topics that I just spoke about. And it became a matter of national pride, national defense. But of course, college algebra encompass these topics that students eventually need for calculus, right? College algebra with trig, functions, logarithmic functions, conic sections. So it was kind of an outdated mindset, so to say, that we eventually, by the 2010s, we were thinking, yeah, not all students need college algebra. What does an English student really need learning? Why does an English major need to learn logarithms? And of course, we're finding that it's very possible to get students through their math requirements, even if they need standalone developmental math in a year. They can take a semester of standalone developmental math, possibly introduction to algebra, and of course, the next semester, take their QR or statistics with the co-requisite. And of course, I talked about the real life applications. School funding has increased, but students really appreciate this. So now we get to, so that's the good. That's the what have we done that's really again, starting from nothing in the 1970s, late 1960s, 1970s. What have we done that's just been working so well? And thanks to the faculty. This is the faculty. This is our faculty, 100%. This is our faculty of course present time, but also past times that have really developed all of this. So very really just a round of applause. I think we need to say every so often to the faculty who have developed. And this, I feel like this is also the touch of the iceberg too. We had several hours. I think we could go on and on about the accomplishments. But what has really given us mixed results? And I also feel I'm guilty of this, that I have tried modalities, initiatives that have not worked. And I've said, I hate this. Why did somebody come up with this? I'm never doing this again. I admit I've done that. And clearly, that's not a good mindset, because just because something didn't work doesn't mean it was a failure. It might not have been appropriate for a specific group of students. There's possibly ways we could tweak it so that it could work better. But I think it's always important to look at something that maybe hasn't worked very well and what could be better. So a couple of initiatives I want to kind of mention that have had some mixed results. Well, the first is the Emporium model. And probably some of you have used this or used this at times. We call it Math Academy at Sinclair, where students learn mathematics at a self pace in a computer lab, sometimes a large class size where they will learn through My Math Lab or ALEX or some kind of computer software, generally on their own, but there's a lead faculty member who's more of a facilitator, usually accompanied by a tutor or more tutors who kind of circulate and help the students. That's generally the whole idea of the Emporium model. Some schools do a hybrid model where it's part lecture, part lab. There's part introduction where the instructor introduces a problem and then the students work on it, or it's just full lab. And the interesting thing is the Emporium model has been around since the 1970s. This was actually something tried by faculty who had classes of like 80 or 90 or 100 in the 1970s and were like, I have this big, huge heterogeneous group of students. What do I do? So they split students kind of into groups and had them work at their own pace, based on whatever skill level they were at. So it's really been something that's been done. I kind of find that funny because if you remember, like in the early 2010s, it was like, this is the answer to everything. It's the Emporium model. We've rediscovered penicillin. It's gonna like give us 100% success rates. And I think there has been good with the Emporium model. This is just some conceptual data that you're reading right here. That it definitely does allow students to really focus on more troublesome topics, get more individualized assistance. Right here, what you're looking at is something I've discovered through speaking with students and faculty. Generally, awareness is the key. I think when students, usually problems occur when students enter the Emporium model not knowing that it's the Emporium model. Especially maybe non-traditional students who don't have experience. So if they're aware, one faculty member said that they always contact students in advance, for their developmental math class, that you are in an Emporium model. This is kind of what's going on. They have the teacher contacts the students earlier, so that they're aware. And of course, the uniformity is kind of important. Some uniformity. One disaster that was relayed to me was one instructor was saying in their school they couldn't agree on how much lecture to implement for the Emporium model. So you had one instructor who was, let's say the class met for an hour and 40 minutes twice a week. One instructor would spend 20 minutes lecturing, then the students would work on their, on the computers. One instructor would lecture for 60 minutes. Another instructor would lecture the whole time and give the students the work they were supposed to do in class at home. So clearly, structure was very important there. And once they got the structure, it worked a lot better. And both students and faculty have said that it's really better for the lower level classes. Introductory algebra, where it might be more of a brush up for students. They don't necessarily need all the introductory guided practice. So the bad, I don't even know if I should say the bad. Maybe in hindsight, I probably should have said the challenging. But I guess what's yielded results that aren't very good. Again, what you're looking at here is conceptual data. As you can see, I've cited it. So some have found it's just, less successful than a traditional class setting. There's concern about lack of depth, that students aren't really, getting they're not really learning. They're just kind of learning to implement something into my math lab or Alex. So those are just some conceptual concerns there. And some data that I've discovered from working with faculty and students. Again, non-traditional students. One gentleman was back at school after 22 years. He struggled so much with the Emporium model. I think it was my math lab. I mean, he struggled with the software, but he also struggled with just the idea of the self-pacing, and everybody was so far ahead of him. His school only offered the Emporium model for the developmental math class he needed. So you know what he did? He actually he worked it out where he could take that math class at another school like a half hour away, and he drove a half hour away to this other school where he could just get traditional instruction. I mean, a counter argument is, okay, students have to learn technology, but I mean, he would not have passed math had it not been for this other option to go to another school. And some students really need that guided practice. And what also some students mentioned was the Emporium model worked well for them in the earlier classes, but when it got to, for example, intermediate algebra, when they had to, for example, maneuver system of linear equations 3x3, very long, like solved by completing the square, it became problematic because they needed more of the initial guided practice, as opposed to learning it on their own, which they were able to do in more of the traditional. Some faculty members have said they get concerned that this creates bad organizational habits, that students struggle with organizational habits, and what helps them with the organizational habits is the faculty monitoring or modeling the organizational habits step by step as to how to do a problem. Whereas when they attempt to do the problem on their own, they just immediately attempt the bad organizational habits that got them into, let's say, a lower level math class. So that's some on the Emporium model. So this is, and again, there was a Q&A question I think kind of leads into what we're going to be talking about here. So inquiry, which has been, first of all, inquiry really, this started more in K-12 in the 1990s, actually 1989 to be exact. And this was a big deal in the 1990s in K-12 and kind of seeped its way up to higher education in the 2000s. And what it was is more of a push for more group-based instruction, more inquiry-based instruction. Achieving the Dream, for example, if you remember that initiative in the 2000s, which still exists, looked at or pushed colleges to do more, look at more initiatives that are going to help student success. And this was for example of one of those initiatives. But over the last 20 years or so, we've seen more of a push for external entities, the Dana Center, Carnegie, and of course the state, because these entities talk to the state saying, well, this is what you should be pushing colleges to do. And again, here's some of the rationale that, something we talked about before. It engages students more. And of course, group-based instruction, there's different, there are moderations of this, but typically it's having students work in groups, whether it be researching something online, whether it be looking at their notes, looking at their textbook. And instead of, for example, like probability, the instructor leading the lecturing or doing guided practice, the students actually work together to construct the formulas or the algorithm or the way of doing something. So the students work together. And the instructor kind of circulates around the room and serves as a facilitator and really more asks questions rather than answers questions. That's kind of the idea of inquiry. There's different, there's moderations, but that's the idea of it. And you can kind of see this is just the rationale. This is the rationale. And the quantitative reasoning course that I spoke about before, there have been, because that course was largely developed by the Carnegie and the Dana Center. And as part of that, they have really pushed that this course should be taught using more of an inquiry-based approach, not instructor-led, but more of a guided, more of an inquiry-based approach. Okay, so that's interesting, Drew. It's interesting. Okay, yeah, experience. Yeah, kind of, experience it first rather than, get it. Okay, so, but here's some things, and you can see it's under mixed. It does seem that every few years, the push for inquiry, and I'm going back about 15 years or so, it seems like it makes a run and then kind of fizzles out. Then it makes a run and it fizzles out. And I guess my question is, why has inquiry not really sustained success? I mean, there's clearly a lot of positives of why it should be used, but it does seem like, at least on a national level, when looking at the initiative, it seems like there's a push for it. We don't hear about it. There's another push for it. It seems to kind of come and go. Of course, initiatives do that, but is there a reason that it doesn't seem to, despite all these positives, that it doesn't seem to stick? I think that's what I'm saying. It doesn't seem to really stick. So I've spoken with students and faculty regarding their experiences with inquiry, whether it be teaching developmental math, whether it be using learning communities. Remember, learning communities, when they were very popular in the late 2000s, really pushed for more of an inquiry-based instruction. And of course, the quantitative reasoning course. So what have students and faculty said? There have been some responses I think we just kind of need to look at. There's been some frustration, and that doesn't mean that inquiry is bad. So by no means am I saying that, but I think we need to look at the feedback that we've gotten in terms of what could we do to improve it. And to be honest, I don't have those answers. I think it's just a question of looking at the feedback and what could we do to improve going forward. And you can kind of read through some of these. A lot of frustration, and clearly students are used to their teachers giving them or telling them what to do. So that's part of it. They're not used to the idea of it. But what I do go back to is this. Students have really relayed that when they get that, the more clear their answers are, or the more clear their conversations are, feedback are from faculty, the more it helps them to retain or persist. When they get answers that they feel are vague, they are more likely to kind of withdraw. The math anxiety kind of worsens. And with inquiry-based instruction, I know a big push is to, rather when a student asks a question, to just kind of probe them more rather than, give them the answer. And that's kind of frustrated or turned students off. One gentleman said he was in a quantitative reasoning course. He couldn't take it. So he went to his advisor and said, do you know somebody who teaches this course? I mean, he liked the group work. He liked the collaboration. In fact, he said that helped him, collaborating with his peers helped him to get to where he was. But the breaking point for him was just the whole idea of group-based instruction. And again, one push that we'll hear is, well, if the groups aren't working, that you're putting the students in, switch the groups. And it was like, well, okay, switch the groups again. That just became a frustration for both, faculty and students. And I'm going to get to that top point last, the top point that you see there. But yeah, this one gentleman was saying that, he, working with his peers got him through developmental math and into college level math. He was an older student, and he said that, working with peers and study groups and engagement was a big part of his success. But again, it was when he had to learn the material without help from the instructor. And like I said, he found another class. Fermi problems, which are really pushed in these quantitative reasoning class. Fermi problems, for those of you not aware, are very abstract problems that require critical thinking skills where there's not really an answer. So a Fermi problem could be, how many balloons could fit in the classroom? How many ways could you say the alphabet front and back? And there's not necessarily an answer, but it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of talking. And I think that frustrated students because it was like, okay, do I need to know this for the test? I don't really know where we're going with this. I'm kind of getting lost. Um, so there were some frustrations, and you can kind of read, and yeah, the more vague answers kind of turn students off. I thought the top point was interesting because it's like I couldn't have conversations with faculty about inquiry-based instruction without micromanagement coming up. It was almost like it was tied to micromanagement, where they felt forced, faculty that is, to implement the group-based instruction. It wasn't really their choice. It was kind of forced to do that. So let me go back a minute here, because something else too, and this kind of goes back to Drew. I think, if I hope I'm saying that right, your question. What really they found has worked, faculty and students as well, and like the quantitative reasoning course, is it's not that you want to dump the critical thinking or you want to dump the problem solving or dump the group work, but just there are so many cases where students just need that introduction. I mean, there's abstract topics like probability. And students just need that introduction and guided practice. Doesn't have to be lecture. I really hate the word lecture. It can be just guided practice where you're still engaging students, but they need that introduction. And then they can work in groups on problem solving. You can still implement problems that use critical thinking skills, but it's an idea that so many students just need that guided practice at the forefront. Now, are some students capable of fully inquiry-based instruction? Absolutely. One faculty member I spoke with said that he had a small class. He used the inquiry-based instruction for his QR class, quantitative reasoning, and they just took off. It was like they almost didn't need him. They took off working on their own. He worked as the facilitator. But get this, the next semester he tried the same thing with a different group of students, and it just didn't work. They needed more of a guided practice. They needed more guided practice or instructor-led discussions to kind of help them. Kind of shows you that one size just doesn't fit all. And again, we work with such a diverse group of students. So the last point is just the uncertain. And I've really got one point here. And actually, I've done full workshops on this. There's probably a lot of time we could devote to this. And what lies ahead that could be troubling? I am very concerned, and I know some of you, depending on what state you're in, have had to deal with this more acutely than others, because some states have really gone full force with this. Florida and I know Texas. Just the potential, complete potential elimination of standalone developmental math. Now, earlier I mentioned how we've done a great job redesigning pathways where students don't need 5 or 6 developmental math classes, maybe just one standalone. It could be 16 weeks, it could be 8 weeks, could even be a week of developmental math, just to kind of brush up on the skills, give them the skills that they need for quantitative reasoning or statistics, and then make sure that they're prepared for these classes. But now what I can do is I have some data, because you're reading this right now, where I've spoken with some schools who've had very troublesome data and troublesome experiences with when they've eliminated standalone developmental math, and they've used quantitative reasoning, introduction to statistics as default placement. So students register regardless of their placement score. They're right into QR with the co-rec, or they're right into statistics with the co-rec. And I tend to not like to show these anyway, because I find that I don't want to rush people reading. So I'm very happy to share the data. I don't know if email is the best way, or there's a place I can upload the quantitative data of what happened when some schools actually eliminated their standalone developmental math. It was very disadvantageous to the lower and the middle tiered students. The higher level student who kind of maybe didn't need developmental math but just tested out of that, it kind of worked okay for them. But the lower and the middle tier students were at a very much disadvantage. Co-requisites have worked very well, but I think what it comes down to is they just don't have the bandwidth to serve all students. They students have been very satisfied in that they save students time co-requisites. One gentleman said to me, my life is so unpredictable. It was great that I could take the co-req along with the quantitative reasoning, because if I had to do this over 2 semesters, I don't know where my life would have been. I probably wouldn't have passed. Students also with co-requisites like the fact that they can apply current topics right away to college level topics and see where they come in. Slope of a line, equation of a line. Where does that come in? Oh, in quantitative reasoning with linear depreciation or linear modeling. Oh, there's where equation of the line or slope, the rate of change, come in. So they have been very advantageous, but they just don't have the bandwidth or the wherewithal to serve all our students. So I'm very concerned about this. I've done a lot of writing and research about this. This is a big concern of mine. Like I said, I have some data that I can share. I know we have a few minutes left. So, oh, and I am sorry, Mary. I had 2 polling questions that I wanted to ask you, but we can just do both of those now. Why don't we go ahead and do those? One polling question is on the inquiry one that I mentioned a little while ago. I was supposed to cue Mary to do that, and I forgot.
All good.
And one is on the that. So if you want to take a couple minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes if people have comments or questions.
So there should, everyone, I hope, should be seeing the poll. And there is a question in the Q&A if you want to take a read of that, Brian, while they're answering the poll.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's very important to like enhance the critical thinking skills, broaden the questions. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think on the one hand, you want students to relate. That's a good point. I mentioned about surveying students, but absolutely. I think it's kind of finding that balance of finding ways to relate it to their everyday life, but also are there ways that we can relate it elsewhere? So I think that's a great example in Florida as well.
All right, I'm going to end this poll and I'm going to go to the next one. Okay.
Okay.
So this first poll was based on inquiry-based instruction thoughts and how you feel about inquiry or group-based instruction to the primary source of instruction for introductory community college level math classes, for example, developmental math, introduction to statistics, quantitative reasoning, college algebra. Yes, no, or depends on the class. And it looks like it's about an 11%, 56%, and 33%.
11% yes, 66% no.
56% no, and it depends on the class, 33%.
Interesting.
I'm going to share the results.
I'm just going to answer a question that came up with flipped classrooms. Yes, I kind of find that the same tends to apply for the inquiry-based instruction, where students can get frustrated with that. A lot of that, again, has to do with where they're coming from. This is, flipped models or inquiry-based instruction. They're not used to that in the K-12 field, and that in itself, puts them, I think, at a disadvantage. But again, and another, I think, issue with the flipped classroom is if students don't do the work in advance, there's just not a whole lot you can do. And what faculty have mentioned is that a large percent of the students that they get, especially in the lower level math classes or introductory classes, really come in not having prepared what they need to prepare, and that really kind of puts a sour bag of wet brownies on the flip-based instruction. So I think what I found is it just doesn't work the way it should, because number one, students don't have the experience. They don't do the work that they need. And on top of that, they can get frustrated if they're not getting that guided practice. And again, not saying that it has to be 100% guided practice, that students need to develop more critical abstract thinking skills, but just for some students, they just need that guided practice to get them started.
So I've launched the second polling question, and we got about 3 minutes left. So the second poll question is available. It's, do you feel that standalone developmental math classes can be eliminated and completely replaced with the co-requisite model? So I have almost half answered. So I'll just give it a little bit more time.
While people are answering the question, I don't know if you have thoughts, Mary, and I'm happy to email the data that I spoke about. I'd be happy to email that to those interested, or if there's a place to post it or whatever. The data on the elimination of standalone developmental math.
Sure. You can, what we can do is maybe put that as a link on the sorry, my brain, on on the archive for the AMATYC webinar page.
Okay. So
I've also posted in the chat, everyone, the attendee survey. It's a link, so just to kind of let you know. And let me end this poll. So it seems that most people, 63%, feel that a standalone developmental math class cannot be eliminated and completely replaced with the co-requisite.
So it was a no, I guess, for this.
Yeah. And then, 25% says it depends on the class. So.
Yeah, I just want to comment on Diana's comment. Yeah, I think for some, and I think with inquiry and I say flip-based instruction, it's just I'm tentative to say that it can't be extrapolated to the mass, but for some it can. And I go back to that gentleman who had that one class where it just took off for inquiry-based instruction, but then the next class it just didn't work. And I think that's good that you mentioned, Diana, how it's a very structured pre-assignment. So that kind of goes to the fact that maybe if it is more structured at the beginning, that could help students as well, because they do, despite what they say or not, they crave that structure.
All right, I think we are almost done with our time. I want to thank again everyone for joining.
Could I also, I don't know if my email is showing right here.
It is showing. Yes,
okay,
it is.
Other questions, and I have some of my articles on there of the author's page too. Just my, if you're interested, just in my other research. But any questions for me? I'm happy to continue to chat with you, or anything similar on math.
Great. Let me stop the sharing. And again, I want to thank everyone for attending this great Friday afternoon. A reminder that the attendee survey is in the chat. I will also send a follow-up email to all those that have registered. And again, thank you, Brian, for being here today and presenting.
Okay, thanks. And this link you put is where I can post the data?
No.
Oh, okay.
You'll send me the data.
Okay, I'll do that later.
Gotcha, we can talk later.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's email later and we'll get it figured out.
Righto.
Perfect. All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the recording.
Thanks, everybody.
And everyone have a great rest of the day.